So this is George William Vallillee. He was born January 6th of 1927. He was in the Army during the Korean War as a corporal. And this is being recorded May 22nd, 2016 in Battle Creek, Michigan. My name is Amanda Vallillee. I'm George's granddaughter, and Beverly Vallillee, my grandmother, is here to help out with the interview. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. All right, so can you tell me about when and where you were born?
About when I was born?
Yeah.
Where?
Where?
Oh, Washington, D.C., and 1927 I was born. And in those days, my parents, mother and father, he met my mother when he was in France during World War I. She was a practical nurse and treated her, and they liked each other so much, he brought her to this country. Those days, the work my father did was sort of ornamental work. He was a mason type, and he worked on the National Cathedral in some manner in the ornamentation at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. And they moved all over the country for jobs. And that's how we ended up in Battle Creek, because I think he came here to work on the Catholic Church downtown St. Philip's. And this was sort of the end of his journeys. He settled down here. Whatever.
Yeah, no, okay, that's good. Did you have any siblings?
No.
Half-sister.
Well, you're right. I had halves, yeah. Up in Canada.
Yes, she was in Canada.
Ottawa. She was married to an Anglican priest, and my parents are buried up in Ottawa.
Okay. So what were you doing before you entered the service?
I worked for the newspaper.
You went to the New York School of Photography.
Yeah, well, I that's after I got back on the GI Bill.
That's right.
Yeah. I worked for the newspaper a period of time, starting out as in the dark room and stuff, and running the wire photo, which was the way they distributed, Associated Press distributed images with cut lines, and I would load the drum. I can't remember it. You had to do it in a dark room, and the dark room was in the basement, and the worst place it could be, because all the scrap paper came off from the presses when they put new rolls of paper to print, because they printed the paper right at the site. And so you'd be up to your chin in paper, because these big rolls of paper were weigh a ton or something, you know. And but the dark room was right across from the elevator where they put this stuff. So anyway, where was I going with that? Dang.
No, it's okay. It's interesting to learn about. Did you have any other family members who had served in the military?
I don't think so.
Parents were dead.
Yeah, they had passed on.
Okay. So how did you end up getting drafted?
Well, when they were gone, my parents, and I was deferred because my mother's legally had bad eyesight. She needed someone to care for her because my father was dead. So for a period of time I was exempted. When she passed away, then they said, okay, come on, you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what was it like when you first were enlisted? What happened? Like, where did they send you?
Oh, they sent me the basic training, and they run the dickens out of you, you know. You have long marches, 5 or 10 miles, big obstacle courses, live machine gun fire. You're crawling under barbed wire, and they have a machine gun that is firing about 6 or 8, maybe 10 inches, I don't know, above your head.
Wow.
You keep your head down.
Yeah.
As you're crawling under this barbed wire. And it's sort of what they call an obstacle course.
Right.
And you had a lot of different things you had to do, but that was the one that sort of you remembered.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was and we used to pull targets. Pulling targets is, they had, about 5 foot wide, big targets with a bullseye. This was a part of the training, you know, firing the M1 rifle. That's what most GIs had, is a M1. And you learn to fire other weapons too, like a 2-inch mortar and a what they called a grease gun. It was really a very simplified 45 caliber weapon that generally what officers might carry, but you had to be checked out on all this equipment. And it had a magazine, I forget how many rounds in it, and it was a bolt action, because it's very simple weapon. Had a heavy bolt. It's with a spring behind it, and so you pull that, it had a hole in this bolt, you pull that back and it click in place. And then when you pull the trigger, the spring would push a cartridge in and fire the bullet. But usually the GIs, like I was, officers might carry that, or certain people, but I'd carry the M1 rifle, which weighed about 10 pounds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was heavy, sucker. But, see, what else?
Were you in basic training for a long time?
Not terribly long, a few weeks. The only time in basic training of an event, I remember the coal miners had a strike. Because I was stationed initially down in the southeastern part of the United States when they first went in, it seems like. And they had, the coal miners went on strike, and they called out, I don't think it was the National Guard then, or what?
No, they called out the army.
The Army, that was it, yeah. And we thought, here, these big burly coal miners have been working, you know, underground, and here it's got 19-year-old kids. But we went through some riot training and formations. You come in a V formation, you know, with a M1 rifle and a bayonet. And in a V formation, you move forward. On the coal miners, the idea is, and then you break up the group. It's like a wedge.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them have to be forced that way. And you'd be shoulder to shoulder with your other GIs, but that didn't last. It was over in no time. So it was never any rough stuff. But
You mentioned that the group that you were with was pretty young. About how old were you?
Oh, probably 19.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and these coal miners, they were brutes, you know.
Yeah.
At least that looked like it to us. Yeah.
All right. So, did you have to get any specialized training while you were there, or because you were already a photographer, were you already set
When I was where?
in basic training before you went into Japan?
Oh, well, everyone got a certain amount of training. Like I say, you had to go through basic soldier training at firing different weapons, and you know, like I say, crawling under barbed wire with your rifle. You had to learn how to do that, and they'd fire machine gun back and forth, you know,
Yeah.
to keep the guys kept their head down.
Would you like to tell her what she asked what you did in the service? When you were stationed in California, didn't you teach photography?
Well, see, I was stationed on the west coast at San Luis Obispo, I think it was, yeah, for about a year before I was shipped overseas. That was a good duty. San Luis Obispo is halfway between San Francisco and LA. So when we had time off, we could go either north or south. A lot of times we'd go to, they had a lot of beach towns, they called them. Morro Rock was one location. It was a big, just out off the shore a ways. It looked like a big rock mountain, you know. I don't know if we have any pictures.
But didn't you tell me you taught some photography there?
I'm trying to remember. Boy, it's a long time ago, Bev.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Teaching people how to use their cameras?
Yeah. I think that's what we did at the San Luis Obispo.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. So, was it a big change from just being at home going into the military?
Oh, sure it is.
Yeah.
Everyone eats together on time, you know. So, yeah.
How did you adapt to kind of such a quick change into such different social standards? And
Well, it's uncomfortable for a while for some people, you know, and but you adjust. You know.
All right. So then, where did you end up serving? I know you mentioned you were in California. After that, where did you go?
After that, I was shipped overseas on the General Meigs. It was a big, like a freighter, and they put the GIs in the bow or in the stern. And in the center part was where there'd be a dependents that were family members of maybe some officers and stuff that were shipped overseas to be as a family. They could do that, see. And some of these guys lived off base, just, you know, like they were home except in a different country. But, let's see, I'm trying to think of, lost my train of thought.
How long did it take on the troop ship to get to Japan?
Oh, 2 weeks on the troop ship, and because we didn't stop at Hawaii, we just went straight over. And what was another thought, but oh, they had dependents in the center of the ship. Maybe I mentioned that, but in the bow and the stern, they put the GIs. Well, in the center of the ship, there were hardly any dependents. You could have fired a cannon, not hit anybody, you know. But we were packed, and I think I have a picture down there with a buddy in the bunk, you know, showing you how close they were. And they made you get out, it seemed like every day or so, up on deck, the guys would stay in that bunk, you know, and it was very crowded. So you get out on the deck for fresh air. But the center, like I say, was for dependents, and you could fire a cannon, I hit one. No one in it. But we were in the stern or the bow, and I was in the stern, which is curved, and all I do remember about that, there was a lot of guys getting seasick, and they'd go down into the stern and vomit. And there was a little ridge on the back end of the boat below deck. And as the ship went like this, you know, on the ocean, it's that throw up would slosh back and forth. Because, you know, a lot of guys were sailors.
Yeah.
But
so that's not too much fun. I bet you were glad to get off the boat.
I didn't have a problem being seasick.
Oh.
I was lucky that way.
That's good.
But some guys just couldn't handle that motion all the time, you know. And we were packed in tight. And you showed her the picture of my friend Bob Ratz in the bunk. And, yeah.
All right, so once you got done with that trip, where did you end up being stationed in Japan?
On Kyushu, southern Japan, outside a town called Kokura. There was formerly Japanese barracks that we had taken over, and it was just a short walk between that building. I don't have any pictures of that, do I?
I don't think so.
To where we'd work on the bodies. And that was, we also worked with what they called DACs, Department of Army Civilians. They were civilian guys who had some bombing experience of working with bodies. And one side of the room, this big, great big building we worked in was, oh darn, I don't want to get gross, but for a while it would have maggots on the floor and stuff. And the odor was awful. And they had big exhaust fans on the roof, which was a V roof, and they'd sprinkle stuff that smelled better. But it took about a year after leaving there before I could get rid of that odor, you know? It was just, whew, terrible.
Yeah. So you were working with bodies. What were you doing with them?
Well, I was photographing them. You know, they'd come in. There's some GIs they'd bring them by truck to our facility. And then there was guys that would bring them into the facility where they'd have paired up these two tables, and there was just rows and rows on both sides of the room of those, and they'd put them on the first table, and some of the GIs would have to strip all the clothing off them, and they had to make sure that they had no live grenades on them, which and other ammo, you know, because they were just picked up on the battlefield. And once they got them stripped and prepped and cleaned up a little bit, they moved them to the next, this galvanized metal table, which is, you know, about so wide. Then they moved to that, and then you start the processing. And like I said, they had DACs, which were undertaker types, or at least had that experience with.
What did you photograph on the bodies?
Well, we had, oh, that's right. For a while, the commander of our company, excuse me, we'd have a long rod, I forget, two and a half feet long, like that. And you had to run that rod through the bullet, you know, say if it went here and out his back or something, you'd run that through there. And then they put a number on the, where it went in, that was the identifying number, and then put it on the other side too, so you photograph both sides. When we got a new base commander, or company commander, I forget, he said, you don't have to do that. Just put the number by the hole where the bullet went in and where it came out. And the reason they did that, all that film that we shot of these bodies, I never saw it, didn't even process it. It was sent immediately to Washington, D.C., the film unprocessed. And they did then at USIA, United States Information Agency, I think it was stood for. I think that's it. And there they would study where these wounds are happening, so they could redesign or make improvements on flak jackets. That was the body armor that was worn. And so that's why they needed to know where the, you know, guys are being killed and how.
How did you help with identification of who the wounded soldier was? How could you photograph anything to prove who they were?
Well, this is before, I think I mentioned earlier, before DNA that we have now. So when you went in the service, they put in your 201 file, which is your personal record of all your information. All your markings like tattoos, if you had a broken arm or something, you know, they could x-ray and know that.
Dog tags?
Dog tags, yeah, as you saw. And the bodies.
You photographed them? You photographed dog tags?
Well, yeah, and they would put the dog tag between his teeth, and that's it's got a little notch in it. I don't know if they are. Is it still here?
Yep.
Here, you can see here. See that notch?
Mm-hmm.
As I recall, that would be driven up in between the teeth to secure and for identification. And on the dog tag, it has your reference to your religion, Protestant or Catholic or Jew, and it have your blood type. See, there's type O, and I can try to remember what else. I don't know if that's my birthday or not, but
So you were involved in photography for identifying bodies that
That's
came
right,
over
yeah.
from Korea, people
yeah,
who were killed in combat?
yes.
Okay. So how did they know, like, how did they find bodies and send them over to you guys?
Well, that I don't know. They,
Remember the grids?
yeah, they, as I said earlier, I think I mentioned,
Yeah, but this is
the
on
whole
film.
of Korea was on a grid system. And as the battles moved forward or back, you know, up North Korea, move up that way, and then North Koreans driving back south, and where I lost my train.
Well, they had the grids identified.
Oh yeah,
On a map.
and when they went south, they had to get out of there because they'd been run over, you know, by the enemy. They'd put them in mass graves. It'd be a shell hole, or they'd dig a big hole with a bulldozer, I don't remember, and throw all the bodies in there, but they'd have a record of who was in there. But of course, after a while, you know, they'd disintegrate, and it'd be all mixed up. Maybe 10, 12 or so bodies there.
Mm-hmm.
And later when they came into that area, they knew what battle took place because of the grid system, and where they were at and who was in there, but they would be all mixed up, you know. And so there was guys that, I forget what you call them, they'd assemble a body, the skeletal remains, fitting, you know, all the bones together, and then for shipping home. And try to identify them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They knew who was in there, but of course they got mingled.
So before they sent those bodies home, after they tried to reassemble them, would they send them to you guys, your team?
Well, no, when they were ready to go home, they drove them to, I think it was Mojiport.
Is that what you were asking?
Well, like, in between, you said that you would help, like, photographer, like, you would be taking pictures of injuries or wounds, since these bodies were not necessarily, maybe you wouldn't be able to see where the wounds had been. Would
Right.
they not send them to you to get?
Yeah. Well, not all of them were skeletal remains, you know, because we got a lot of them that were just embalmed and sent home.
Okay. So in between, like, if they found bodies and that they had to dig out of those pits, you wouldn't have to take pictures of those bodies?
As I remember, I don't remember shooting pictures of the skeletal remains.
Right.
Mostly what I shot was the, you know, that had been recently killed,
Okay.
that weren't excavated or something.
And any identifying marks or
Yeah,
dog tags, whatever would help identify the person.
yeah.
So did it have kind of an emotional impact to have to be seeing all these injuries and?
Well, it certainly wasn't pleasant, and the odors were not pleasant. And it took me, I think, about a year when I got home to forget sort of that aroma, if
Yeah.
you like. But you get over it after a while.
Yeah. Do you think it's kind of desensitizing after a while of working with that you kind of just,
Yeah.
yeah.
And when they sent them home, they used to joke about the guys that were DACs, or Department of Army Civilians, which were sort of embalmers, the guys that had knowledge of that. joke with it, they were so stiff, they could stand them in the corner, you know,
Yeah.
the bodies.
What would happen when there were bones? How do they go about trying to have a whole body from a pile of bones? You had anthropologists there that would try to fit them together.
Yeah. And I do remember, I don't want to get too nasty, but dental technicians, see, we had different types. There was one guy that must have been killed and a truck or tank ran over his head and it was a pile of mush. Everything else was fine. And that poor dental technician was digging through this, what was the guy's, whatever, trying to find his teeth, you know, so they could, that was part of identification, you know.
So if he was looking for his teeth, did they have records of what the teeth
Oh,
were?
yeah, they kept, like you say, now they have DNA. In those days, they had all your tattoos, markings. It was part of your 201 file,
Right.
which your personal
Dental
file.
records.
Huh?
Dental records.
They had dental records, yeah.
So you mentioned that you were working with the DAX, and then what like specific group were you a part of?
Wound ballistic team.
Okay. So you guys were all, that entire group was sort of responsible for,
Yeah, we worked as a group, like I think I said, there'd be an x-ray technician, and then there's a photographer, which I was, and dental technicians, other skills, about 6 or 8, I can't remember them all right now, but
okay. All right, did you make a lot of friends while you were there, or get to know anyone?
I used to like to, like I said earlier, hang out at a sake house.
What's that?
It's where, you know what sake is?
Can
It's
you explain?
rice wine. We have a bottle downstairs. I kept, it's older in the hills, but it's probably okay.
It's not from your time in Japan. We bought it here
Yeah,
a couple
yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. Anyway, I hope I don't repeat myself too much, but I used to like to try to get to know the people. Of course, language is a problem. And there was a time when I used to hang out at this sake house, and about 6 or 8, I forget, stools, and you go in there, and it was southern Japan, so it was mild temperatures. No door, just like a curtain to hang down, and well, that's where I spent a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a Japanese guy came in one day. He was probably had been in the military, and tried to have a conversation. And for some reason, I forget how we got into it. He wanted to prove his strength and something, and at the bar he wanted to arm wrestle. Well, they're smaller people, and their arms are shorter, and I'm trying to, you know, do the arm wrestle bit, but I have to bend my hand down to get his hand, and he's a strong guy. It was almost like, as the best I remember, about a standoff, you know, but generally the Japanese were pretty good. Like I said, I mentioned Ginkgo-san.
No.
Ginkgo-san worked at this sake house, and I had seen French movies with Japanese titles, subtitles, and I said, why don't you come with me to our uh, compound, you know, where the PX was and all like that. And they had all sorts of American services, you know, movie theater and a lot of things like that. And I always felt a little bad because I finally convinced her to come with me. And she insisted on walking 6 feet or 8 feet behind me. I kept saying, come on, no, go, you know, Ayaka, say, hurry up. And, but I felt badly, the MPs at the gate, when I was trying to take her into the compound, told me, you go on up there ways. And I, well, okay, and they talked to her, and they assumed that, you see, there was a lot of, prostitution was not illegal in Japan. Mm-hmm. It was, and a geisha girl wasn't necessarily a prostitute. They were entertainers. They were hosts. When businessmen or so forth had a little meeting, they would be there to serve them. So people, as I understand, are confused and think that a geisha is a hooker, you know? So, anyway, Ginko-san, is the best I know of her name, walked behind me, and I wanted to take her to an American movie, and the MPs told me, go ahead, and I found out later they just assumed she was, you know, a hooker, because it was legal in Japan. Mm-hmm. And so I always felt bad about that, because she wasn't.
And you say you tried to learn the language in the sake house?
Oh, yeah.
By pointing it?
Pointing at things and, you know, and, you know, find out what different things were. Mm-hmm. And we were able to communicate all sorts of methods, you know, hand signals, and I knew a few words, like, what was it? I could count, I learned to count up to 10, which the kids' way of counting, I guess. And then I lost train of thought again.
Okay, so it sounds like if you were spending time at the sake house, you're kind of hanging out with the locals?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I even made good friends with the fellow that had the sake house. And I slept there one night. Don't I have a picture of us somewheres? Sleeping,
I don't know.
yeah, on a tatami. Tatami is a grass mat that they use. It's very common.
So you got to learn a lot about the culture then?
Yeah, I found that interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so disappointed that so many guys, all they could do is go to the darn PX and get bombed.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to explore.
Yeah.
Who was the friend that gave you the husband and wife tea set when you left?
Oh, well, he was a Japanese, I think in Nisi.
But did he work at the PX, or how did
Yeah, he
meet?
worked, not at the PX,
Oh,
at the facility where we handled the bodies.
I see.
And he gave me, which we have there in the other room, husband-wife tea set. Husband's is a little bigger, the wife is smaller.
Mm-hmm.
They have covers on them, and that was very nice. And that was very nice because they weren't rich people, and you know, I appreciated their made a little sacrifice to purchase that for me.
Yeah.
So,
Did you get to bring much else back from Japan?
well, I brought, like I say, these dolls, the Hakata dolls, and Fukuoka dolls, and which I have here in the house. You can see one's at the bottom of the stairs. Maybe you saw that.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see what else.
So you got to spend some time with the locals then, so that was kind of your social life there. Did you have anyone that you stayed in touch with back in the States?
No, because I couldn't read Japanese. I think I had to.
There's a letter
Letter?
that came from somebody that knew him,
Yeah.
and he never answered, I don't believe.
Well, I didn't know how to.
Or was it in Japanese?
Yeah. Well, it's here somewhere. isn't it?
Yeah, downstairs maybe, I
Yeah,
forget.
I think it's right at the bottom of the stairs, isn't it?
I'll go
Take a look. Be careful not to. If it bothers you on the stairs, don't go. Their envelopes are long, and because his intent was, he wanted me to. We were friends, and he wanted me to write him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't know how to write Japanese,
Yeah.
and he couldn't read English. So,
So language barriers.
but the
definitely a
intent,
problem.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Did you know who it was from, even though you couldn't read it?
It was from him, this DC or Japanese guy I worked with,
Okay.
as I recall.
Yeah. It's very neat. So, corresponding, you couldn't really correspond with people once you got back here. While you were in Japan, was there anyone who lived in the United States who you kept in touch with?
I wasn't a great letter writer,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't have anyone anyway.
Okay.
My mother and father, I think, were dead. I had a cousin, Andy, who was lived on the West Coast, or East Coast, and rarely ever saw him. So I had no brothers and sisters,
Mm-hmm.
so that was about it. And like I may have mentioned, when I was discharged, I had acquired certain vacation time. So that's when I traveled all over on the Philippines and up into Hong Kong and
Mm-hmm.
new territories and stuff.
How were you able to do that?
Oh, that's some Japanese money, and you see now,
Wow. Here, I'll let you.
this is a yen, yeah, $5 yen. Hong Kong and Shanghai Corporation.
Wow.
Now this is their letters, but if I put a note in there and put this in the post office, their mailbox, who in the hell would know what that says?
Yeah, they wouldn't know how to ship it.
Yeah, so we just hung on to this.
Wow.
You notice there, see, they write vertically, I guess.
Mhm.
And that's why the envelope's sort of vertical and sealed on the end.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah. And then this, they say, is money picked up in Hong Kong.
So you were in Hong Kong. When did you end up there?
Well, like I say, my parents were passed on. I had no brothers or sisters. So rather than coming right back, I had 2 weeks accrued vacation. You know, you get leave time.
Mm-hmm.
So I traveled all over that part of the Pacific on the space available. You could go to an airport and catch a flight if there was a seat available. Now I'm talking about cargo planes, and all they are is along the inside of the plane is, I forget what they call them, jump seats or something. They're sort of a rope type of seat you sit on. Not terribly comfortable, but they do. And then they could put cargo in the center. I remember one time, I think it was a jet engine they were transporting, and there's some sort of engine, and that was my companion and we had a forced landing because of some engine problem. That was before jets, or at least jets were just coming on. And so it was a prop plane, you know, a cargo plane. See what else?
That's really neat. So because you were able to just sort of hop on a cargo plane, you could travel around Asia in that area?
Yeah. Like I say, I had no family or reason to go. No, I always like to travel and adventure.
It's exciting.
So if you go right to flight operations in the airfield. And the reason I got up into Hong Kong, at the time it was a British colony. It's independent, I think, now or something. But so I couldn't get a flight into Hong Kong. So I went to the British airfield it was, and I got a flight on a British plane that flew in Hong Kong. It was I think they were still, the British had control of Hong Kong then or something. And there was something else. Oh, and I'd hang out at these flight operations at the various military airfields, trying to hitch a ride, you know. And after a while, they get tired of you hanging around waiting for space available. And I remember going into, I think it was Okinawa, and we got in there. These guys get tired of you trying to hitch a ride, you know.
Right.
I got into Okinawa and I got stuck there. They said, "What did they send you here for?" Well, they sent me there to get rid of me. And they said, all the flights coming into Okinawa, I think it was, and going out are full. The flights just stop maybe for refueling or something like that. And, you know, so that's how I finally got on a British flight, let me ride from up to Hong Kong.
Okay. Was that kind of a little bit scary to kind of be in a foreign country and realize you're not sure if you're going to have a ride to get somewhere?
No.
No?
I don't think so.
Didn't really feel too stranded?
No, I didn't. Of course, one thing is I think I recall, if you did that, took your leave time overseas, you had to have deposited in the Bank of America, I think it was $1,000. That was to guarantee if you couldn't hitchhike around and get back by that means you had to have enough money to buy a commercial airline ticket to get back to.
Okay.
And if you didn't use it, you got it back, you know, when you got home.
So you did have something to fall back on if you
Right.
could find a way to get there.
Otherwise, there'd be guys stuck all over the place, you know.
Right.
But I'm sure there's things I've forgotten.
Oh, no, this is good. So, were you still over in Japan when the Korean War ended?
Well, yeah, I think so. They had that Panmunjom was a demilitarized zone where the North Koreans were negotiating with the South Koreans on a peace treaty or ceasefire. And I think it's still in effect, as far as I know. But I'm sure you could research that maybe and find out. But yeah, it was halfway up Korea. They made a neutralized zone where the North Koreans and the South Korean people would negotiate, you know.
Yeah. So if you were still in Korea then, was it exciting when everyone found out that the war was over?
Oh, I'm sure there were.
Right.
I'm just trying to remember.
That's fine.
You were just sent home. I mean, you know, it wasn't fireworks and all that sort of stuff.
Not as much of a big deal.
No, you're just happy to get out of there and get home.
So when you came back, was Battle Creek a lot different, or were there a lot of things that were how you remembered them since you weren't gone too long?
Yeah. Well, no, they weren't a lot different, as I recall. This picture here, I remember as a little snapshot I took on the street, there would be these fortune tellers. He's reading the palms, you know, of the person. And I got a little snapshot of it.
Interesting.
And her mother found that.
So their culture is kind of unique in comparison to ours.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was interesting though. Like I said earlier, I guess, I was disappointed that so many GIs or guys from this country, you know, didn't seem to be interested in any culture other than going to the PX where they could get bombed out of their mind. You know, some, not all of them, of course, but, and if I dare say, prostitution in Japan was legal. To get to the Dinshaw, where we had a camp just outside of Kokura, the town, you had to cross, I don't know if I did give you this stuff, but what the guys named as VD Bridge. It was a little stream that ran down, and it was just a low bridge. You know, I forget, not very wide stream. But the hookers would hang out there, 5 or 6 of them. And you had to walk a couple of blocks, and it was rather dark because they didn't have street lights all over like you do here. And to catch the Dinshaw, which is the streetcar. And that streetcar then would take you down to town.
Okay.
A lot of, I don't know. Any other questions?
Yeah. So when you got back home, how was it readjusting to being back in your normal life?
Felt real good. I'm trying to remember coming home. I just don't remember that. You know, it's been a long time ago.
Yeah. Did you go back to working for the paper?
I might have for a short time, I don't recall. But then we opened our own business. Bev was the front office. I met her at they had, our church had what they call Zeta Chi groups, social groups, young people have met, and so that's how I met Mother. Well, I see, I met her there. I couldn't dance very well. They'd have little, at this Episcopal church, they had a little parish house. It's no longer there, the parish house. But I'd try to dance, and I had 2 left feet. And she was a school teacher. I always make a joke, I married my education. And one day I went out for the paper to cover something at the school where she was teaching. And I think she probably can remember better. Asked her for, you want to have a cup of coffee? And our first date, after the little cup of coffee, was, there was a Stockyards Inn in Chicago. That used to be the center of cattle and the stockyards. And they had a famous restaurant. It was called Stockyard Inn, right where all the cattle was brought. It was a sort of a distribution point for all the cattle farmers farther west. They'd bring them in there. And so I think, see, she should be here. She should be here to confirm something. Our first serious date, I drove her all the way to Chicago.
Oh, wow.
And we came back and had a wonderful steak at the Stockyard Inn, and come back. No hanky-panky. No.
So then you two got married and started your photography business, so you got to keep
Yeah.
working with photography like you had in the service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had the GI Bill. I did go to New York School of Modern Photography for 2 or 3 months, but it was okay.
Was there anyone who, not necessarily a Japanese citizen, but someone who maybe worked with you in the military from like your group that you mentioned that you have maybe made some contact with over the years?
Well, I tried to make contact with a couple people. One was we had a picture down there in about a friend,
What's the subject?
anyone I kept in contact with. There was a guy named Barboza,
Oh yeah, on the troop ship.
yeah, and I went to see him, and he lived in Detroit somewhere, I think. And when your dad had an office in New York, and I went with her dad to help him move, he closed his office out. He was with America Marsh Pumps. They sold pumps for landing craft and stuff like that, I recall. And so I tried to speak to this Barboza, but he was a hellish guy. And when I went up to say hello, he says, "What the hell are you doing here?" You know? I said, went up with her father. And I said, forget it. And we turned and left. But, let's see, what else? This is not very coherent.
No, it's okay. Don't worry about it.
Did we bring up that Japanese letter? I found it.
Yeah. Yeah, this one?
Oh, yeah, it was under the glass down there.
Oh,
Yeah, you brought it up, didn't you, honey? Yeah. So,
yeah, and there's Here's me on this side. Did you see that?
Which one?
That's me.
Okay, on the far
And
right.
two of my friends. They're our company master sergeant, and I don't know the other guy, I can't remember.
It's okay.
This is just a snapshot. I thought
Hmm.
it was interesting. He's reading palms.
Yeah.
Did
So
you get his company and battalion or any of that information?
I think we have that down on the form.
Okay.
This is I don't know what you got here.
Do you have some more pictures?
Well, signal corps thing I had to go through. That sort of a training school for a couple months. Here's our platoon at one point picture. Feels like double weight, yeah. I mean, you know, every platoon had a group picture like that.
Mm-hmm.
This is a General Meigs when we went overseas on somewhere. I may or may not have been in the part. This was when we were on sort of maneuvers. You had to go on maneuvers all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they call a field kitchen. You know, you go on a 5 or 10 mile hike, and cooks and bakers would set up a food line, and you see they have heaters and those garbage cans where you clean your I mean, what do they call it? It's metal stuff you carried, mess kit.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a picture of you in your uniform?
What?
Did you have a picture of yourself in your uniform that we could see?
Well, yeah.
Like a portrait?
Here we're it lay everything out for inspection. That's me. In fatigues, that's what you mostly wore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Sergeant Parsons. I think I'm about midway down here. I'm not sure. Because you, in a platoon, you form the platoon by height. The tall guys in front, the shortest guys in back. And I always remember there was one guy who was real short, and he was called Telescus. And of course he had a hell of a time when they go on a long march. These long-legged tall guys would, you know,
Mm-hmm.
drive him into the ground.
Right.
This is just a snapshot I think I took in Hong Kong or somewhere. This shot, I was on the ship going overseas. These were, I think, Chinese officers. I shot it through the window or porthole and that part of the ship. And I don't know who they were. They just had some rank.
Why did they have Chinese officers? They joined the
Maybe they
American
were
Army?
Korean. I just forget, honey. And like I showed you, this is me and our platoon sergeant. Just a little street scene where the guy's doing the
Palm reading, yeah.
palm reading, yeah. And this is an envelope. Well, you saw this envelope.
Yeah.
vertical.
Very cool.
I don't know what they do at the post office with it.
I don't know.
Oh, let's see. Any questions, dear?
Yeah, so how did those experiences over in Japan, how did that affect your life in general?
Well, like I said, it took me a year to get over the odor.
Mm-hmm.
But I found it very interesting. Like I say, when I was over there, when I took my leave, I had no family to come home to. So that's when I traveled around. Slept in the rain with a shelter hat. Shelter hat, you have a cartridge belt. Did I cover that?
I think so, yeah.
Hmm?
I'm not sure.
And you had a raincoat or shelter hat
Mm-hmm.
that went on the back of your cartridge belt. It just sort of folded up in a certain way. And by shelter half, I mean two guys would put each of the half together, and you could get in there in the rain and you have shelter. Find a little hummock, a little higher ground, so that you don't end up sleeping in a puddle. So.
Yeah. So did you take away any really big lessons that you've applied to your life?
Oh, I'm sure all things affect your lives, you know, even unconsciously. You know, excuse me. I like sake and
You like what?
sake,
Oh, sake, yeah.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
But people were really nice. They tried to introduce me to others. I remember one time they took me, these were professional men, but the language was the problem. I couldn't ask the simplest question. They knew no English, so that was frustrating. That just happened momentarily.
Mm-hmm.
But,
So overall, even though you were drafted, would you say that it was a good experience and you're glad that you got to
well, it's
experience it?
certainly, yeah, an experience that a lot of guys didn't have maybe,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I now you look back, it's easy. I wouldn't want to miss it,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't want to be buried over there either.
No.
So,
Well, I think that's it. So thank you for
oh, you're welcome.
taking
Thank
the time
you,
to do
honey.
this.